At passages that kind of apply to the Mormon Christian debate and dialogue. We got an email from Lisa who said, my question to you is regarding heaven. I'm a born-again Christian, but I've been told by Mormon missionaries that I cannot get to heaven unless I'm married. Is this a standard of theirs to get to the highest level? Does it mean that being saved is not enough? Well, last week we covered what Jesus said in Matthew 19 about those people who get divorced for any reason other than fornication within the marriage covenant are guilty of adultery if they remarry. And this is ugly and it's painful, but it is true. Tonight we're going to read the following verses up to that, where Jesus articulates even more about marriage. See, the disciples were blown away by Jesus saying, hey, if you divorce for any other reason other than fornication, you are an adulterer. And they said, if this be the case of a man with his wife, the apostles said, it is not good to marry. They made this declaration. And Jesus said in return, all men cannot receive your saying, save they to whom it is given. For there are some eunuchs which were so born of their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, he says, let him receive it. So, just what the heck does all of this mean? It means a lot, most of it in contradistinction from LDS doctrine. You see, these apostles of Jesus were so full of Jewish notions, they thought, or they were under the impression, that they could divorce their wife for almost any reason under the sun. It was their privilege. And to hear Jesus say otherwise caused them to respond saying, well, if that's the case, it's better not to marry at all. In some cases, this is absolutely true. Many people should never marry. It's okay if you don't, to be single. When I came out of Mormonism, one of the things that blew my mind when I met Christians was their acceptance of people who had never been married. Because in Mormonism, it is so different. One woman I met who was in her mid-30s, and she was quite attractive, she explained to me that being single enabled her to serve the Lord better full-time, and that Jesus was her partner and king, and she didn't necessarily need a man in this life. To an ex-Mormon, such talk was unheard of and revolutionary. After all, when I left my LDS mission, the mission president took me aside and he said I needed to get hitched as soon as possible. And I cut my teeth on statements like these. Look, check these out. Joseph Smith himself said, except a man and his wife enter into the everlasting covenant and be married for eternity while in this probation, meaning while on earth, by the power and authority of the holy priesthood, which is in Mormonism, they will cease to increase when they die. That's from the history of the church. Brigham Young said, listen to this one, no man can be perfect without the woman, so no woman can be perfect without a man to lead her. I tell you the truth as it is in the bosom of eternity. If a man wishes to be saved, he cannot be saved without a woman by his side. This is quoted in Spencer W. Kimball's Miracle of Forgiveness. By the way, just to let you know, Brigham Young also said this. Listen, the monogamy order of marriage, so esteemed by modern Christians as a holy sacrament and divine institution, is nothing but a system established by a set of robbers. Meaning, polygamy is the only true order that God endorses. Monogamy was something that was instituted by robbers. In the church-owned publication, popular when I was a kid, called Achieving a Celestial Marriage, it says on page 65, consider this fact, your marriage is a laboratory for godhood. See, in Mormonism, a person cannot achieve the highest degree of the celestial kingdom unless they have been married in a Mormon temple. And it used to be unless they were polygamous. And so, to a great extent, getting married for a Mormon is equivalent to salvation and exaltation. So, here in old Matthew 19, Jesus seems to say something very differently. And what he states, we can understand a few things. First, the apostles said to him, hey, Jesus, it's better then for a man not to get married. And Jesus responds, well, all men cannot receive this thing that you're saying, okay? And he says, save to whom this saying is given. Meaning, not everyone can remain single except those to whom the single life has been given by God, ordained by God. And then he goes on and he lists those who are able to receive the advice that the apostles suggested in never getting married. He says, for there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. So in other words, he details who could remain unmarried, and he does this by talking about eunuchs. And saying some were born this way, some were made this way by the cruelty of men, and some have chosen to be this way for the kingdom of God's sake. Notice that being a eunuch, eunuchs worked in harems because they had themselves castrated, or they were castrated. That means they didn't have any sexual drive. And they were allowed to work within the harems of women because they wouldn't be having relations with them. And so Jesus says, some men, are born eunuchs. It's part of the fall. And they don't have the sexual drive, so they don't have to get married. And some men, by the cruelty of other men, are made eunuchs, meaning slaves were taken and made eunuchs, and they don't have to be married. And he says, some men, for the kingdom of heaven's sake, have made themselves eunuchs, meaning not necessarily only through castration, but have said, I choose to be celibate. These too do not need to marry. He says, those who can receive it, let them receive it. Marriage, whether because they were born asexual, made asexual, or chose to be celibate throughout their life, not being married was fine with Jesus. It just depended on the circumstance. But notice, in every case, to not be married also meant to not have sexual relations. That's built into the argument. You got